Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We should get started in about a minute or two. Thank you.
Where's your pug?
Kicked out of the room. Great to see you.
Nice to see you too. It's always the question whether you take the chance of having them in the room or downstairs screaming for the next 2 hours.
Yeah. She's going to have her own webinar series at one point.
So I'll kick off the meeting in about 1 minute. I think some people are still joining. We do have over 500 people registered for today's session.
No pressure.
All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the kickoff of the 2021 Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub Women Entrepreneurs Annual Conference, presented in partnership with the Women's Enterprise Organizations of Canada, WEOC. We're starting off our series of events today with our first session, She-Covery, the role of women's entrepreneurship in pandemic recovery. I am Stephanie Day, Director of Research Partnerships at Diversity Institute, and I'm pleased to be here with you today. I will introduce your session chair shortly. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, which is now home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Our regional hubs and partners across Canada have similarly gathered on the traditional territory of many of Canada's Indigenous nations who have cared for these lands since time immemorial. Let us take a moment to recognize the many traditional lands on which we are connecting and acknowledge with gratitude and respect the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples whose footsteps were first to mark these lands. The Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, or WEKH as we call it, works across the country through 10 regional hubs in English and French to share research and resources for women entrepreneurs in Canada. Drawing on the expertise of a network that includes more than 250 organizations, we also host and support programming that highlights opportunities and best practices for women entrepreneurs and the organizations that support them. As Canada begins to focus on post-pandemic economic recovery, supporting women entrepreneurs is more critical than ever before. The research shows clearly that structural barriers long faced by women entrepreneurs have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, an economic health crisis that has affected women entrepreneurs more than men and has affected Indigenous, racialized, and other diverse entrepreneurs most of all. Today, our discussion will focus on how the ecosystem is responding to support women entrepreneurs during this time. We'll start the afternoon off with a special video welcome from the Honourable Mary Ng, Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and Trade, followed by a presentation on the challenges and opportunities for diverse women by Dr. Wendy Cukier, founder of Diversity Institute, WEC's academic director, and professor at the Ted Rogers School of Management. We'll then move into a panel featuring some incredible leaders in the women's entrepreneurship ecosystem. I look forward to spending the afternoon with you all. Over to the video.
Hello, everyone. It is terrific to be here today for the launch of the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub's annual conference. I would like to thank Wendy Cukier, who leads the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, together with all of the collaborators. And I want to thank you for all of your incredible work, especially over this past year. In 2018, our government saw both a need and an opportunity when we launched the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy, and with it, the Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. We knew that if we were going to keep pushing for gender equality, then we needed data that reflected the real experiences of women entrepreneurs and businesses in Canada. The Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub has grown to do just that, and much more. As a collection of hubs that stretches from Whitehorse to Halifax, to Thunder Bay to Vancouver, Regina, Montreal, Calgary, Winnipeg, and more, the Knowledge Hub has brought together over 200 organizations and thousands of women entrepreneurs and businesses to share their experiences, their expertise, and their resources. The Knowledge Hub connects diverse ecosystems across the country, including with partners like the Black Business and Professional Association, FEMASAR, and the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Businesses. It is a key piece of our work to help even more incredible women entrepreneurs and business owners succeed. We are marking a year of living with this pandemic. Because of the stories that I've heard from entrepreneurs from coast to coast to coast, and backed by reports like the Knowledge Hub's women business owners and the impact of COVID-19, we know this pandemic has disproportionately impacted women and communities that were already underrepresented in our economy. This pandemic has highlighted and exacerbated existing inequalities, and the work that the Knowledge Hub is doing is more critical than ever. As we continue to respond to this crisis and plan for the future, we remain committed to an inclusive feminist recovery. Although this year is different than 2018 when we launched, we are again faced with both great need and the opportunity to build something better. We have an opportunity to create national affordable childcare so that women and caregivers can participate equally in the workforce. We have an opportunity to improve women and other underrepresented entrepreneurs' access to financing, networks, and expertise, and to bring more women-led Canadian innovation to the global stage. Together with partners like the Knowledge Hub, we will continue to work to support inclusive economic empowerment in today's crisis, in tomorrow's recovery, and well beyond. I can't wait to see what connections and ideas come from today. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister Ng, for that message. I would now like to introduce you to your session chair, Michelle Eaton, Vice President, Public Affairs at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. Over to you, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. And I'm just so honored to be with you all today and to introduce a special presentation by Dr. Wendy Cukier on the challenges and opportunities for diverse women. Dr. Cukier is the founder of the Diversity Institute, academic director of the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, and research lead of the Future Skills Center, and a professor with the Ted Rogers School of Management. Wendy, I can't imagine how long your card is with all these hats that you wear. And she's one of Canada's leading experts in disruptive technologies, innovation, processes, and diversity and inclusion. Thank you for all that you do. The OCC is so proud of our relationship with you and your team, the work that you do and the work we've done together to advance women's economic empowerment. Over to you. Looking forward to this presentation today.
Thanks so much, Michelle. It's always a pleasure. And, you know, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce has been a really important partner of ours because we believe that in order to support women entrepreneurs, we need everyone at the table. And you know, one of my happiest moments was when Rocco Rossi stood up and said, childcare is not a women's issue, it's an economic issue. And I think that's one of the themes that will resound today with many of you. So I will ask the proverbial question. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to rely on my team to help keep me on time. But it's a pleasure to be here. And I will, I think on some issues I perhaps sound like a broken record, so I'll apologize in advance for things that you may have heard before. This is the first in a series of sessions that will constitute our annual conference. And while the minister wasn't able to be here today, we hope she will be able to attend some of our other sessions. And I have to say, I do think we're very lucky. Canada's women entrepreneurship strategy really is unique in the world because it doesn't just focus on providing support directly for women entrepreneurs. It looks at strengthening the ecosystem, but even more importantly, it has a whole of government approach. And I think initiatives like the 50-30 challenge, for example, are going to have a profound impact. So just to remind you, most of you were at, I think, our conference before. There are certain structural issues we have to always remember when we look at women entrepreneurship. So when we talk about women entrepreneurs as majority owners of small, medium enterprises, there are about 16% of them are owned by women, which is about 114,000. However, when we define women entrepreneurs as self-employed entrepreneurs, 37% of them are women, and it's almost 1 million. And definitions really matter. This is one of the things that we've looked at carefully. The fact that women entrepreneurs are less likely to be incorporated, more likely to be in services, more likely to be smaller, and to have different aspirations often than men really is important when we think about where we are and also the impact of the pandemic. Women-owned businesses are less likely to be high growth, although there are some that are high growth. And some of this is deliberate. Some women simply do not aspire to growth and rather are looking for sustainable businesses. We also know that there are still gaps in financing, although some of them are narrowing. And that women still receive about a quarter of the angel investments that men do. We see women entrepreneurs are exporting at twice the rate they were a couple of years ago. And the gap between women entrepreneurs and men entrepreneurs in terms of export has narrowed quite considerably. And that's important because exporting is very much associated with economic development. We also know that there are significant differences between Indigenous entrepreneurs who are women and non-Indigenous women entrepreneurs, between newcomer entrepreneurs and those who were born in Canada. And you can unpack those categories even more and look at racialization, look at different ethnicities and so on. And we have to be very attentive to some of these differences. The impact of COVID has been devastating to small businesses generally, but it's hit women-owned businesses even harder. And they've laid off more people. They're more likely to close. They're more likely to report challenges. Some of this does have to do with structure, the fact that their businesses were smaller to begin with, less well-financed, more likely to be in the services sector. And let's not forget the crushing burden of unpaid work, which has really come to the fore during this pandemic. And these impacts are exacerbated when you add layers of intersectionality. So I won't go into this in detail, but again, women-led businesses are less likely to be in things like tech and manufacturing, and more likely to be in accommodation and food services and retail, exactly the sectors that have been hardest hit by COVID. Similarly, COVID hit the smallest of businesses the hardest. Women-owned businesses are more likely to be those small businesses, and you can see these differences quite graphically in terms of the increased likelihood that revenues will have decreased substantially. Then layer on intersectionality. And again, I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but we know, for example, that Indigenous women are even more affected. Part of it is because many of them live in rural and remote communities. And think of the shifts to digitization What that's done is increase the impact of the digital divide. And many of the rural and Indigenous women who are in most of need of access to resources and support are least likely to have access to internet. When we look at newcomer women, they face additional barriers in terms of access to resources and supports. When we look at rural and farming women, again, access to infrastructure is a big issue, as well as access to other kinds of supports like transportation and childcare. But let's look clearly at the issue of Black entrepreneurs in Canada, because I think this is perhaps one of the most striking differences. And this is not specifically for Black women entrepreneurs. This is for Black entrepreneurs who are members of the Black Business Professional Association. And it's a comparison of their survey results to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. That acronym should be CFIB, not CIBA. So when asked if the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy would apply, Black entrepreneurs were twice as likely to say no. When asked if they were fully open, they're half as likely to say yes. When asked, can you pay your April bills? More than twice as likely to say no. Do you have the capacity to take on more debt? Twice as likely to say no. And what this tells us is Black entrepreneurs in particular are twice as affected by COVID and half as likely to have access to the supports, whether government programs or loans, that other entrepreneurs. And we have to, we can continue this discussion and look at people with cognitive differences and disabilities and different sexual orientations and gender identities. And we're dealing with many of those organizations, and the story is always worse when you layer on different aspects of identity. So again, I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but the Bank of Montreal ran a competition for 10 $10,000 prizes, $100,000 on the table. 1,000 women entrepreneurs applied from across Canada. And we had a data sharing agreement with BMO. They gave us anonymized results from those applications, and we then looked at the findings. The most common theme that came out in all of those applications was the impact of COVID on women's mental and physical health, the multiple demands that they're facing, and their feelings, frankly, of guilt and stress and burnout. Revenue loss, of course, we saw as an important issue. We did see some evidence that COVID had prompted many women entrepreneurs to take new strategic decisions and look at new directions for their business and shift, for example, to digitization. We also found a profound awareness of the importance of workplace safety and the health of their employees. And as I said, increased focus on online presence. And many of them, it came through so strongly in their comments. Many of them felt huge amounts of stress because of the impact that COVID was having on their employees and having to lay people off and so on. Again, we saw some positive indications that COVID had created new and innovative collaborations, women banding together, and SheEO had some really interesting initiatives where women were not only providing peer-to-peer emotional and technical support, but they were also getting together to share marketing opportunities and so on. And we found that, excuse me, again, while many women did benefit from government programs, lots of them did not. And the uncertainty was a major concern. For the most part, COVID has been devastating, but we should also acknowledge that in some ways it did drive innovation and change. We then looked in a more detailed way at the data and pulled out the responses of 60 Black women. And this is where my eyes were really opened in terms of the differences in the experiences. First of all, what comes through very strongly when we look at Black women entrepreneurs is so often they're drawn to entrepreneurship to provide a specific product or service that reflects their unique culture or needs. You know, not being able to find hair products or the right skincare propelled many women into health and beauty businesses, for example. Food is a recurrent theme, and there's lots of examples of Black women talking about going into entrepreneurship in order to celebrate African and Caribbean heritage. The thing that comes through, however, on an overwhelming basis is the experience of anti-Black racism and inequality. And the extent to which this was something that pushed many Black women into entrepreneurship is unparalleled when you compare their experiences to others. And this motivation, I think the resilience or the experiences of exclusion, anti-Black racism, and so on, also created much of the inspiration for new approaches, ways to create safe spaces and community. And as I said, the experience of anti-Black racism is intergenerational. Many of the women talked about being inspired by their parents, but also their parents' experiences of anti-Black racism. And the extent of trauma, the extent of violence, the extent of microaggressions that these women experience was really quite profound. And we see similar patterns when we talk to Indigenous women entrepreneurs, for example. These are things that we have to constantly bear in mind when we're looking at designing programs and policies to support Black women in particular, Indigenous women in particular, newcomer and refugee women, and so on. What really motivates us is this vision of creating an inclusive innovation ecosystem. So of course, it's important to support the organizations like WEOC and She-EO and FEMASUR and many others who are designed to support women entrepreneurs. But what we want to do is we want to crack open the doors in the mainstream organizations, whether it's financial institutions, regional development agencies of government, incubators and accelerators, media representation of entrepreneurs. We've defined our challenge as far bigger than perhaps was originally envisaged, because frankly, the $5 billion that has been committed to the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy is a game changer. It's really important, but it's a fraction of the money that is invested across Canada in economic development, in innovation and entrepreneurship. And we want to make sure women get their fair share. One of the biggest barriers we face are the stereotypes that continue to associate entrepreneurship with technology and with men. And, you know, I've said this so many times before, forgive me, but I'll say it again. You ask people to identify 3 entrepreneurs, it's going to be Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, depending on their age. People don't talk about Oprah Winfrey or Kylie Jenner, who's a billionaire at the age of 20 using Canada's Shopify, or Celine Dion, who knew she's worth $800 million. So the way in which we associate entrepreneurship so tightly with technology creates all kinds of pathologies in the system. It affects the way governments define innovation. It affects the way they design programs. It affects the way they set criteria. It affects the way banks assess risk and opportunity. And there's no question, I've worked for 30 years advancing science, technology, engineering, and math and women's participation, but it's not the whole story. And if you focus on STEM, this is what you're going to get. So the other piece that's important here is the fact that entrepreneurship, there is nothing about innovation or entrepreneurship that associates it specifically with profit. It's about creating change. It's about doing things differently. And it's very important for us to, and very much following SheEO's lead, make sure that we're also including social entrepreneurship in our understanding of innovation and entrepreneurship. Our model really looks at concrete outcomes and how we can drive change. And I won't go into this in great detail, other than to say one of the things we've started to do is try to look at value for money. So we know of lots of programs where government agencies have invested $5 million. And we can look at what they have got for their $5 million. And I can tell you unequivocally, they have not got as much return on that investment as we can document organizations like FEMISOR and SheEO produce. Whether we're talking about job creation, whether we're talking about attracting investments, whether we're talking about confidence building and empowerment. And certainly with SheEO, their innovation is they also track social impacts. So not only are they creating jobs, not only are they driving growth, not only are they attracting investments and serving especially BIPOC communities, but they're also driving social impacts. And so we really have to think about new models and making sure that we're supporting women entrepreneurs wherever they are, that we're not assuming that they're all about growth, because some don't want to grow. And, you know, one of my arguments is government often will focus on tech and they'll focus on creating postdocs, for example, as jobs. Postdoc's not a job. Postdoc disappears when the job disappears. Hairdresser is a better job in some respects because it will be there in 10 years. And so we have to start to crack this bias, I would argue, against services at the expense of tech. And it's not that tech isn't important, but it's not the only thing. One of the things I'm really proud of is we've been really pushing hard to apply our diversity assessment tool to many of those stakeholders in the ecosystem. This is very much like gender-based analysis, but also tied perhaps more specifically to organizational goals and objectives, and digging into the way policies are framed, the way selection criteria are applied, who's doing the selection, who's doing the outreach, and so on. And we've been working with a lot of the key players in the ecosystem. We've also been digging right in to the questions of how organizations are doing their procurement, because procurement is probably the #1 way in which large organizations can put their money where their mouth is and make space for women and diverse entrepreneurs. And we're really lucky we have Alison Campbell on a secondment from the federal government for 2 years just to work on the procurement issue. We're also trying to shape the skills agenda. Skills in recovery, super, super important. But what we see is that large corporations, which frankly account for only 10 to 20% of private sector employment, completely dominate the discussion about skills. There's almost no attention being paid to what SMEs need in terms of skills, what entrepreneurs need in terms of skills, what diverse women entrepreneurs need in order to be successful. And we're pushing really hard to make sure that's part of the discussion. We're also looking at some of those structural issues. Not incorporating means that women are not eligible for many programs. We're trying to get the programs to broaden their eligibility requirements, but we're also trying to get women to consider the benefits of incorporating, because it's better to grow with other people's money for the most part. And there's some complexity around this, but it's an example of where we've identified in the research a structural issue, and we're trying to address both the supply and the demand issues so women have more choices. We've worked hard to develop programs to meet specific needs, and I hope you'll hear about some of these programs, but we know, especially because of the different experiences of women entrepreneurs, that programs that are designed for them have got to be tailored. And whether, we ran a program in Nova Scotia for racialized women entrepreneurs, and one of the things that came out in the evaluations was the fact we had childcare was the determining factor in their ability to participate. Things that lots of people don't think about and consider. Very excited about the Rise Up pitch competition. So remember I said BMO made available $100,000, 10 times $10,000 awards, and 1,000 women applied. That's 1,000 women out of 1 million women entrepreneurs across Canada. The Rise Up pitch competition, which BPPA and the CASA Foundation and Deciduous Women ran, attracted 700 Black women entrepreneurs. There are about 10,000 Black women entrepreneurs in Canada, 10 to 14, depending on what you count. That to me signals a profound need to support Black women entrepreneurs. If you have 700 out of 10,000 applying for $80,000 versus 1,000 out of 1 million, that should tell you something about the extent of the need. And the final decisions are being made this Friday. I hope lots of you will be able to come. And we'll hear more about some of these programs. I think Ashley Richard, our Indigenous outreach coordinators, done an amazing job in building partnerships with Indigenous organizations. And again, the experience of Indigenous women entrepreneurs, profoundly different than the experiences of others. And we have to really dig into that in order to support them. During COVID, lots of women needed connections, and we built very quickly, with SheEO's help and the Forum of Women Entrepreneurs, the sharing platform many of you, I think, know about. And one of the things I'm proudest of is the See It, Be It campaign. By International Women's Day, we will have 1,000 award-winning women entrepreneurs, diverse in every imaginable way, from cultural entrepreneurs like Celine Dion, to tech entrepreneurs, to owners of airlines, and more. And I think fundamentally, if we can start to shift the stereotype of entrepreneur, so that people don't think of Gates and Zuckerberg and Musk and Jobs when we say the word, we'll have made a big difference, because if you can't see it, you can't be it. So we're working hard. We got more to do. I'll finish talking now and look forward to the follow-up discussion. Thanks so much, all of you, for coming today. And there's more where this came from. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Excellent presentation, and our discussion today is so important. To reiterate, oh, we're getting tongue-tied too early. These are not just women's issues, they're economic ones, and public policy makers really need to take note. The inclusion of women and other disadvantaged groups in the entrepreneurial ecosystem is necessary for economic recovery. And while we've all seen various numbers, closing the gender gap when it comes to entrepreneurship alone could add billions to Canada's GDP. So thank you very much. Really compelling presentation. I saw a lot of people making comments in the chat about how some of the numbers were eye-opening or shocking, and a lot of people thankful for you sharing that information. So also for the folks that are online, I saw a number asking about the deck. The deck will be made available in both English and French, along with the recording to attendees after this. So this will be in your hands shortly after. So thank you for those that have already asked about that. Now, before we dive into the discussion today, let's take a moment to get to know our panelists. So we're going to kick off things with Nadine. Tell us who you are, first name, last, what you do, a little bit of flavor about you so our audience can better understand the point of view you're bringing to today's conversation. And if I could ask all the panelists to put their videos on as well. Nadine.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Great to see you, Wendy. It's great to see we have so many people as part of the forum. I'm Nadine Spencer, the president of the Black Business and Professional Association. And I believe in women entrepreneurship. I mean, I became an entrepreneur from the age of 12, and at another time we can talk about that. But this is why this work is so important to the work that we do. You know, women are the matriarchs of families, and we need to strengthen them. And of course, wearing the BBP lens, I look specifically at Black women entrepreneurs, of which I am one. And the quirky thing about me, I'm psychic. I don't know if you all know that, but that's another conversation as well. But I look forward to the discussion with the great women on the panel. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nadine. And it looks like we have a couple other webinars set up about psychic tendencies in matriarchs. So I look forward to that discussion as well. Maya, over to you to introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I would actually be the first one to sign up for the Psychic Matriarch workshop. Yeah. So I'm here for that, Nadine.
I'm feeling it too. We'll talk after.
Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Maya Roy, je suis la PDG de YWCA du Canada. Hello everybody, my name is Maya Roy. I am the CEO of YWCA Canada. And really where I'm coming from in this conversation, I've spent the last 20 years actually running labor market access programs and entrepreneurship training programs for women of color. So I feel like I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of seeing amazing women entrepreneurs succeed, but also seeing the systemic barriers that are in place. And I'll be sharing some of that during my time. Quirky thing about me, as I share with the 7 and 10-year-old in my life, it's always good to eat dessert first. So yeah, that's my motto, and I'm sticking to it. So thank you, and looking forward to the conversation.
I like that motto as well, Maya. So thank you for your introduction. And Marcella, over to you.
Well, hello. Good morning here from Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory. Very proud to be representing Alberta in this discussion, as well as the Women's Enterprise Organizations of Canada. So my role is CEO of Alberta Women Entrepreneurs, and I have a real passion for this subject area, having been in the world of entrepreneurship as an entrepreneur myself, and experience the triumphs and the devastation of that experience. And then I joined Alberta Women Entrepreneurs primarily to help build out some programming for Indigenous women. My family we're proud members of Salt River First Nation in the Northwest Territories, but we've made Alberta our home for many years. And also my mother is an immigrant from Mexico City. So certainly have experienced a lot of reactions to the diversity that we represent. And so this has been, when I discovered Alberta Women Entrepreneurs, it felt like a beautiful fit to help build this community and really start to look at all of the different facets of entrepreneurship. And as Wendy mentioned a few times, around those intersecting factors as well. So that's been a real passion for me. So this conversation is really timely. This is something we've been discussing the challenges for quite some time. And I'm really excited with this amazing panel and everyone out there who's participating in the session to look at the future of and the possibility of what women entrepreneurs can bring, because we are strength, we are a force to be reckoned with, and it's absolutely time to start planning for the future that is inclusive of women in a meaningful way. Really excited. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for your introduction, Marcella. And indeed, we are a force to be reckoned with. I like that. And finally, Jill, introduce yourself.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Jill Earthy, and I'm in Vancouver at the moment, on the territory of the Coast Salish, Tsleil-Waututh, and oh my goodness, I say this all the time. I'm just grateful to be on the land that I'm Apologies. I've been an entrepreneur as well. I've supported entrepreneurs in many leadership roles over the last 15 years. It's funny when you start to reflect back in both the private sector as well as the nonprofit sector, at Futurepreneur Canada, at the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs, at a financial technology platform, Front Funder, and all primary, and then leading a program of female funders trying to increase the diversity of investors who are supporting women entrepreneurs. So the common theme has been around democratizing, creating access for more diverse entrepreneurs to get the resources that they need. And I currently serve as CEO of the Women's Enterprise Center here in BC, and we're a nonprofit organization supporting women entrepreneurs with a holistic approach. So we do that by providing loans up to $150,000 wrapped with ongoing and sustained support, which I think is so critical, mentorship, education, and business advisory support. And we're part of the Women's Enterprise Initiative, which we may end up talking about, which was founded 25 years ago in the 4 Western Canadian provinces. So we are sister organizations doing it in our little bit of our own way, but depending on the regional needs. But that's a really important initiative that recognizes that holistic approach that women entrepreneurs benefit from. And then I'm also an advisor to the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and was involved in a report working with the WECH Hub, and as well as serve on the boards of the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs, WEOC, which Marcella is here representing, and Sustainable Development Technology Canada. So a few different lenses.
Thanks so much, Jill. What an incredible group of panelists we have. Our conversation is going to go to about 1:30 for the folks that are tuned in. If you have any questions, please write your questions in the chat. I'm going to be addressing those later. I have some pre-formed questions that we're going to start off the conversation with, but we definitely want to get the audience engaged. So please don't be shy, add your questions in. And if we don't get to them, we'll make sure that someone follows up with you to make sure that you're all getting your responses that you're looking for. So let's dive in, shall we? Let's talk about the experience of women entrepreneurs during the pandemic. We know that women have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, especially BIPOC and low-income women entrepreneurs. What have you seen? I'm going to kick things off today with Nadine. If you want to talk about your experience, what you're hearing from your peers, tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, so, the pandemic has, been a financial stressor for many in our society. And as usual, minorities and low-income business people, entrepreneurs, have suffered the most. Female entrepreneurs are already at a disadvantage, in terms of access to capital, loans, networking, and net profits, and when the pandemic hit, this only got worse. And we run a program at the BBP called the Boss Women Entrepreneurship Training Program. And I think one of the biggest challenges I saw in this, a few things, childcare, here the woman has to juggle the work, the home, all the other things, and then manage the children as well. And that's been tough. But, there was an incident after our program one night when a woman called me up and she said, she was there, on the program, advancing her business. And then her husband, hit her after that happened. And he said, who do you think you are, being a boss woman, wanting to advance yourself? You think you're better than me. And I think that's some of the things we don't hear about. And those are the additional challenges that women face in the environment as they're just trying to make a way for themselves. And she's trying to make a way out of this relationship through her business. And those are the challenges that nobody talks about. And the reason why I'm so very thrilled to have this conversation and this dialogue is because when we know the challenges, then we can find solutions for them.
Thanks so much, Nadine. And, our work and personal lives truly did collide. You addressed some very serious and real concerns that the immediate impacts of the pandemic on women. So I appreciate your comments. Jill, did you want to weigh in on this? What are some of the things that you've seen and heard from your peers or from through work?
Yeah, well, certainly the things that Nadine mentioned, and then as well as, of course, Wendy outlined a number of the issues around the increased childcare responsibilities, this type of structures, the way that women set up their businesses. But I think also when we look ahead, one of the positive things, and Nadine, I think you just mentioned it, is we're having these conversations a little bit more, right? We're acknowledging that things are not perfect, that things are hard. And there are more forums like this where we can we can try to identify them and therefore find solutions. And so I think when we look ahead, this is going to be really exciting. And one of those is even around, women entrepreneurs do approach building their businesses differently, right? There are multiple growth paths. There's not just one to the unicorn status. That's such a tiny thing. So how we redefine entrepreneurship, as Wendy said too, how we redefine paths of growth, and how we redefine risk, I think we're going to dig into that more, but I think it's a time of opportunity.
Yeah, most certainly. And I think it's so important for economic recovery. We're certainly existing inequities that were inflamed by the pandemic, and then the temporary business shutdowns during the state of emergencies, mostly impacted sectors predominantly employed by women. Yeah. So that was another thing that really kind of amplified things for women. Maya or Marcella, did you want to jump in? Or did you have any additional comments on this kind of topic of what you've heard or seen that hasn't been addressed?
I would just say I really would like to echo Nadine and Jill's comments. When we've been checking in with our entrepreneurs and our program participants across the country, it's very interesting when they basically shared with us what they saw as the biggest barriers with respects to COVID and lack of support from family around childcare, household responsibilities. So I think, again, highlighting the importance of universal and affordable childcare in Canada, but also the impact on mental health and well-being, because it's the social isolation, the work that, and I'm looking forward to hearing about Marcella's work and Nadine's work, that building of community, when that building of community is taken away, that's really challenging. And then again, with having to do that triple burden of household responsibilities, looking after, for example, caregiving, elderly parents, plus childcare, as one of the entrepreneurs shared with us. And she had actually managed to successfully move her business online. But one of the quotes that really resonated with me is that life does not fit into a 9-to-5 box. Mm-hmm. And I think we're really seeing that. So also burnout is a huge issue and something as YWCA we're watching very carefully.
Yeah, good points. Really good points there. Wow. So we've this is really interesting. So we've actually covered some really key issues: childcare, spousal abuse, mental health, balancing all those hats that women do. Marcella, did you want to add anything on here? Have we covered all the subjects, or is there something we've missed?
Well, I mean, there's so much, and we've been hearing so much, but absolutely 100% agree, echo what everyone else has mentioned. One of the areas I know we're going to dive into is around technology, around definitions of innovation, around some of the challenges for appreciating what women-owned businesses, what women entrepreneurs bring to business from that perspective, and to build on what Jill mentioned about that growth piece as well. So, a lot of it certainly has been survival mode, but there has also still been a hunger for growth and for success and for continued development, and really trying to look forward to say, what's the world going to need in 2025? What's the world going to need in 2030? And how can we support that? So how can we actually have our ideas and our voices heard and supported, not only through words, but also through actions, and most importantly, through money?
I love that, Marcella. And we're gonna, folks that have joined us today too, we're gonna have conversation. We're gonna deep dive on some of these issues and the opportunities, but we're gonna leave on, what is it going forward? What is our call to action? How do we seize the moment? There's an opportunity here. There's momentum, and it's so important for, again, I'm gonna repeat, it's not just women's issue, it's an economic issue. So there's really a great way for us all to make some change. So
Michelle, can I just add one quick
Yeah.
thing before we segue to the next part that
Yeah.
I think is important? Another way that women were disproportionately impacted early on was some of the government support programs that were rolling out, the SEBA loan, the RRF loan. They were set up for companies that didn't always align with the way women set up structures. I mean, Wendy mentioned that right from the get-go, but that has set women entrepreneurs back, right? There was an extra time lag there as they were struggling. Now, though, some of those programs have been adapted, but also women's relationship with funding has long been strained, right? Because of the different models. And so the loan that is being offered is not always the right fit. So I just wanted to place that there too.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because women tend to have less of an appetite for taking on loans or additional debt, and they're interested maybe micro grants or crowdfunding is more appropriate for women founders. So that's a very good point, Joe. Okay, great. So let's talk about what's working and what's not. So what supports are helping women entrepreneurs? What more is needed? Are there, I always love these because I always love, are there good examples or lessons learned from others' jurisdictions? Are your organizations offering specific programming that's making a difference? So I'm going to kick things off here. YWCA has done so much for women in terms of support and programs throughout Canada. Hoping we can kick things off with you, Maya.
Absolutely. I think some of the things that we've seen is again that community support is very important. That's certainly working, and especially in many traditional communities, we have alternative methods of savings. So, for example, some of you might be familiar on the call with the circles of support. It's essentially a lending circle where monthly members who are part of the circle are putting money into a communal pot, almost like there's built-in peer support and almost like a bit of forced savings. So that's been one model in many traditional communities that's been important. And for some women, it's been part of their startup seed capital, but then they have the built-in mentorship and that social capital that's there. The other thing that I would argue is unfortunately not working, and I'll just share sort of two quick pieces. And one of the things I love about Dr. Cukier is she always reminds us to look at the disaggregated data and to follow the data. And we've been doing that in our research. And when we've been drilling down and looking at, for example, racialized women versus non-racialized women, unfortunately, the differences are quite stark. We are seeing in the tax data that, for example, racialized women, their revenue annually will be around $9,000. When we compare that with tax data, for example, for white non-racialized men, their average income on the tax filing data goes up to 16,000, and that's wow. That's a real disparity. And this was I should actually, sorry, the caveat. This is data from before COVID. So COVID, I would argue, has only made things worse. So I think if we follow the data, we can start to see solutions where we can start to fine tune and create better systems and processes. So for example, one of the recommendations we've made to the federal government is, for example, for newcomer women entrepreneurs, give them that information as part of the immigration process, right? So they can start thinking about how they want to set up their business in Canada pre-arrival. And in today's era of internet, that's relatively easy to do. It doesn't, unfortunately, that's not a panacea. That doesn't get at the systemic discrimination, for example, with respect to financing. And that's also why we're doing some research and pushing for some broader policy pieces. And the second piece, unfortunately, that's not working, and TELUS Foundation and a number of other tech companies have stepped up, is access to internet and capital equipment. We literally have low-income women who are running their businesses off of Windows 95. And in the Zoom era, if you think about how many times you've had to say, oh, you're on mute, if you don't even have a laptop, and your bandwidth, especially in the north and remote rural communities, lack of access. So investments in internet infrastructure, I think, is really, really important. So that's a bit of a range of what we're hearing and seeing in our research. But I think fundamentally, just not to be a Debbie Downer, one thought I just wanted to leave with the audience, and I'm really interested in hearing from my panelists on, is one of the pieces that we've been struggling with is so many women entrepreneurs, especially BIPOC entrepreneurs, have shared with us that there are those push-pull factors. And for many women, going into entrepreneurship is a bit of a DIY strategy to precarious employment. So if you're working in a precarious part-time job, you're not getting enough hours, you're doing what we call essential work, they're using entrepreneurship as a DIY strategy. So when we look again at the stats, many women make less than $10,000 a year in revenue. And that's fundamentally, at that point, you're defined as low income. So we don't want entrepreneurship to be a strategy for the working poor. But I think it's important to have this broader conversation around what do good jobs look like and how do we support women entrepreneurs to create those good jobs.
Really, really great response. Thank you for sharing that, Maya. And you raised the online digital economy. So I'm gonna actually add in my next question, but we can still talk about the current question. So the current question what we're chatting about, but I'm gonna add, so we're gonna double up. I told everyone on this panel, I wanted to make this not feel like I'm a panel moderator calling on each person, that I want people to interrupt me. It feels like a group of friends that are chatting about these issues and getting fired up. So I'm going to mix things up. This is as exciting as it gets on these webinars. You're welcome. So we're talking about what supports are helping women entrepreneurs, what more is needed, are there examples, or you can talk about your organization. But let's also add in, if you like, or just talk about this, there's the digital economy we can talk about. So the majority of online small business owners believe e-commerce is now necessary in order to have a successful business. The global pandemic was a catalyst for many Canadian businesses to get online. And in fact, out of a lot of the surveys I've seen, and the stats vary, but online small business owners said selling online has made them more successful. So there's been opportunities, even though there's challenges that have come with digitization. So what are some of those examples and success stories that we've heard? I'm going to kick it off with Marcella.
Yeah, so that's absolutely, we saw that trend explode in 2020, and it became not a nice to do, but a must do for many businesses. But along with that came a lot of decision making, a lot of spending, perhaps without fully understanding where this was going, what is the strategy, how is this related to growth? And so it was quite a reactive year for many. And so part of the challenge, on the flip side, so it's one thing to get your products into an online platform. It's another thing to be able to, have good client service, a customer service, to actually have inventory. We saw tremendous lags in deliveries and supply chain issues and borders closing and a lot of things where that really interrupted the ability to have products to sell. And so backlogs of orders, et cetera. So that created some challenges as well. So being able to manage all of those things in the digital space is a different skill set. And for many, it was new. So, it was one thing to put up a website 5 years ago. Now it was really integrating a lot of new technology and new ideas. Oftentimes, there was the comment, I'll just hire someone to do that. But there's a danger in doing that without fully having a strategy and understanding what you're buying. And unfortunately, people get taken advantage of and spend a lot of money on things that they don't really need. So that's one particular area. But on the positive side, what we saw was a lot of community building online. So not only was it about getting products and services online, but also really rallying the communities that a lot of our women-owned businesses had created in person and had started to do online, but they really were able to activate their communities of support. Customers, suppliers, building strategic alliances, finding a manufacturing facility that they could share and, co-create some new products related to personal protective equipment, for example, and pivot that way. So there was some opportunity. And also, You know, we often talk about the bias that's present against women entrepreneurs, in particular around things like winning contracts, around becoming effective parts of supply chains, and around financing and money. So not, you know, private money as well as debt financing. And so we have like one story of an entrepreneur where she's put together something related to human resources. It's actually related to recruitment and employment, to remove bias from the selection process. And how could that be applied? Like, what a great opportunity to take something like that and apply it to a variety of areas where how great to be blind to a lot of the factors that create that bias, unfortunately, in regular systems. So there are those pieces as well that are emerging, clean tech, some really interesting opportunities emerging, a lot of work here in Alberta around artificial intelligence and machine learning, and really integrating that into businesses to make them more effective. So looking at it from the entrepreneur perspective of how to integrate that and make that useful in a way that works. So lots of success stories, also some challenges along with it, but it is certainly another layer of complexity to add on to the plate of, as we mentioned, those challenges that already existed and were really brought to the surface during COVID.
Yeah, and it's exciting, like seeing that agility and people that are, you know, you think about change manager, people thinking about getting their business online, usually the business and there's steps, and then people kind of did things faster. And I mean, have local businesses that are around the corner from me being able to see their products online instead of me calling them is a big shift, and it changed your consumer behavior around a lot of these small businesses as well. So thank you for your comments. It makes me so excited about the, you know, what's been working, where there's more opportunity, but then also that digitization, which has been huge. I did all my holiday shopping local. Jill, I'd love to hear your comments about, you know, what you've seen that's working for supports for women entrepreneurs, or maybe your comments around great examples around digitization. There's great opportunity here. There's been some great things that have been done. Any examples that you want to share would be great.
Sure. Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, obviously, like all organizations, we also had to shift our programming online. And what that did is it actually created more access. So we have seen an increase, just as an example, just between April and December last year, we had over 7,000 participants in our programming. 50% of those were from rural communities, so smaller communities.
Awesome.
But we were also seeing some who didn't have the right bandwidth. They would time it, and they would go in, they would actually download it after, and then they could watch it on their own time. And so we got that feedback, but we had to adapt and pivot to support that. So I think that's an interesting example, because I do see that sort of, you know, it's not easy, but it can create more access. The other thing, of course, we're seeing are these more aggregated marketplaces. So we look at Digital Main Street out of Ontario. You know, we have Small Business BC here in BC is doing that too, and that's also helping more companies to get their message out, right? To amplify their message and to kind of equalize a little bit more marketing. But it's also creating more partnerships. I mean, Marcella mentioned that too, right? And more seeing complementary businesses, and how can we work together, right? And we know that women are that's one of our strengths, is to identify those collaboration opportunities. And then so I think and building that community online is so critical. So those are a couple things we're seeing, but yeah, more partnerships, more collaboration. But the other challenge I should just mention too, we are also seeing, you know, we talk a lot about that K economy, right? There are those companies who have been agile, who have been able to adapt, who have been able to access the support and the resources. And then there are others who are stuck, right, for lots of different reasons. And so that's going to be a big challenge, is how do we support those companies? How do we find them? And so that's an opportunity. We'll frame it as that.
Oh, there's lots of opportunities. And I love that you mentioned Digital Main Street, because it's such a terrific resource for many entrepreneurs looking to get online. I think they have 3 different types of programs. Does anyone know the programs that they can talk to the crowd about, actually, offhand?
You know, I think it's digitalmainstreet.ca. So go check it out.
There's one about helping to get, there's one about getting you support, like teams to support you, where there's one about getting you actually online, so getting you scaled up quickly so that you can have an easy to use website. And then there's a third one, I'm not sure, but that's the website. So go check it out. Appreciate that. Now I wanted to see.
I wanted to just jump in before you move on, Michelle, because
you
I have two great stories.
My psychic matriarch, of course, you jumped in. You knew I was waiting for you.
Over here, I don't know if can you see this? So this is a product that was created by one of the women in our Boss Women Entrepreneurship Training Program.
Sorry, what is that?
It's a candle. It's a candle.
Oh.
And it's called Cultivate, and it's an Afrocentric candle because she felt as a psychologist that the women that were shut in needed something to feel well at home. And so she had these candles, and they're made with all these wonderful flavors. And it's an Afrocentric base product. And her whole marketing strategy is texting people and getting them to lean into the product. And there's also another woman who has used WhatsApp. So it's interesting, like we're on Zoom, and for the individuals who are not using Zoom or having a Shopify store, we're finding other ways. And that's what I find inspiring. There's a whole generational piece of women who are 70 and they've never used technology, and they're using WhatsApp to text their tribe of people to say, meet me at so-and-so and pick up your fish fry, on Fish Fry Fridays. And that to me is inspiring, because then they build that and then they want to know what's next.
Nadine, if they're like, that's so amazing. Like if there's an auntie out there, a psychologist auntie, and she's making those candles for every time I experience a microaggression, like I'm here to lean in, and not just that, I will bring a lineup of people.
Put it in the chat.
I will DM you after.
I will, absolutely, yes.
That's great. Yeah, and if you can actually share the how we can get that candle in the chat, that'd be great.
I will.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. And we can include that in the follow-up emails with the decks and the recording team. Yeah, we'll do that.
Great.
Awesome. Before we move on, does anyone else want to weigh in here? Okay, all right. So let's talk about access to funding for entrepreneurs. So is it surviving or are we thriving? So even before the pandemic, and it was, who raised it earlier? I believe it was Jill. Our access to women had less access to funding. They struggled with access to capital. What are some of those innovative models available to women entrepreneurs to support them for this? And Jill, I'm going to go back to you actually on this one.
Sure. Yeah. So, and Wendy shared some of the data too around access to capital prior to, and a lot of the research shows, right, that it's the funding right from the get-go, right? Funding is a journey, right? As you grow your business, each step along the way, you need different funding types, you need different resources, and there isn't always that acknowledgement. And as women, I like to say that women entrepreneurs are risk astute, right? We're not risk adverse, risk astute. We like to do our research, we like to understand the options, generalizing, but this is backed by data. But so it comes when we access capital, it tends to be, we want to access smaller amounts over a longer period of time. And the result is actually amazing. It's a sustained business growth, right? A thoughtful, sustained business growth. So there are a couple of, and that acknowledgement of those different pathways, as I mentioned before, is here. It's being widely talked about. But to Wendy's point, how do we open those doors and really work on some systemic changes? So there are a couple of things. Right now, Women's Enterprise Center, we partnered with Van City, one of the largest credit unions in Canada, mid-pandemic. So in June, we started the process with them to create a unique loan product for women entrepreneurs wrapped in the support services of Women's Enterprise Center, because there was a need, right? And it's not just about the capital, as we know, it's the holistic approach. And so that was super interesting, but quite honestly, it didn't work as we had planned, because policy didn't shift, policy didn't change. So we've relaunched that program just this week, working closely with them to understand the truly unique needs of women entrepreneurs. And a couple of things that changed, we're looking at, the length of time a company was in business. Well, we reduced that. Looking at the application process, even like women entrepreneurs are busy, right? It needs to be, it needs to be simple, but not because women aren't capable of doing it, but because of time, right? And how do we reduce some of those barriers to access? And then we worked with them and they created two different products, one up to $20,000 and one up to $100,000. But each of them are wrapped in the ongoing and sustained support of women entrepreneurs, Women's Enterprise Center. It's not just a one and go. It's not just a short-term program, it's an ongoing program. And another quick example, even all of the women's enterprise initiatives are dispersing the regional relief and recovery loan program up to $60,000, and which is incredible, as are Community Futures and other regional development agencies. What we've done at Women's Enterprise Center is every loan recipient goes into a peer mentoring group over the next 2 years. So they get the peer support and then facilitated by business advisors. And we've had such a surge of interest in that. And then we're also, when you look at angel investing, right, we know that less than 20% of angel investors are women. So there's a problem there as well. So we need more women to invest. We also need more women to, receive the benefits of that and to serve on the boards of growing businesses as well. And so there are different initiatives. There's the 51 we're seeing out of Alberta. There's Sandpiper out of Atlantic Canada. There's Women's Equity Lab in Western Canada. And what is amazing is they're all collaborating and connecting and sharing deals. And I love that. That gets super exciting. And then the VC firms too, that's the next step, right? And we're starting to see more pressure being applied to make sure that there are diverse people making those decisions, investment decisions, which will result in a broader range of entrepreneurs being funded. So there's work to be done for sure, but there's progress being made. And I think this last 12 months has really accelerated that process because we can collaborate more across the country.
Thanks so much, Joe. Really great resources you shared. I think someone else wanted to jump in. Hold on, I'm looking. Is that Marcella? Did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of our experience mirrors, it's in some way what's happening in BC because we are, sister organizations. We're part of the Women's Enterprise Initiative as one of the 4 Western provinces. And of course, we have some unique economic challenges that Alberta has been facing even pre-COVID. And so that really put a lot of pressure on entrepreneurs, and there's different feelings about taking on debt, about taking on outside money. There's a lot of bootstrapping. There's a lot of love money. There's a lot of different ways that entrepreneurs are building their businesses, and there is, historically, the system has been set up in a way that it creates barriers to the traditional financing, creates some barriers that are very difficult to overcome, in particular if you're new to the country and you don't have a credit rating yet, or it's not strong. And same with you if you're an Indigenous woman, and some of the same issues, equity, security. So some of those pieces, it's that flexible approach and also that holistic approach that Jill mentioned earlier. So it's not about only the money, it's about all of the supports that go around it. So mentorship and programming and different services, free advising, and really trying to help bring in what we can to help support that business. And that relationship is really important. So it's certainly a commitment together with each other. And we certainly see it as an investment. But over the years, we've been lending now for 25 years. We have seen excellent success rates of our businesses. And even as we are working our way through COVID, there has certainly been a really important element of that relationship that's helping we're doing our best to help keep those businesses moving forward. So those pieces are really important. And I think one of the beautiful things about the financing that we offer, and outside of the relief funds, which has been absolutely incredibly well received, really needed, and has taught us some valuable lessons about how to move money faster. And so that's been really a great learning, in particular when you're an organization that's 25 years old. And it's shifted our thinking, it's shifted our systems, and it's provoking conversations across, financial institutions and financing organizations about how to move this faster, how to do this better. And one of the things that is automatically removed in the way we do it is that bias against gender. And we really are looking at business viability, and we're looking at the entrepreneur as part of that package. And it's a different approach. And it is, it's not without its flaws. There's always challenges, but it is certainly something that we hope we can share with the world. We want others to use the same approach. And it's actually really remarkable to see the quality of the businesses. It actually, we have a strong portfolio of amazing businesses we've invested in. They happen to be owned by women, but they are absolutely stellar businesses that stand on their own.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Marcella, for your response. And honestly, I want to thank all panelists for all the work you do in your communities. It's great to hear from the provincial perspective, but it's great to hear about the work you're doing. I'm going to go to Maya, then Nadine. You can either address the question related to the access to funding and what are some innovative models available to women, or you can alternatively speak to the subject of skills. There's much talk about the skills agenda, but a lot of times small businesses are left out, or SMEs. Where do you see opportunities to build capacity for women entrepreneurs? So we can do the two-part question or choose your own adventure, but then go over to Maya.
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly around skills, because I think a big part of our mandate at YWCA, we have 31 YWCAs across the country, and we've been thinking a lot about skills, not just for the past 150 years, but especially during COVID. And I'll share with you why. Many of our YWCAs, they have their own social entrepreneurship projects to raise money that goes towards, for example, our shelters or our skills training. So we have three, or had, sadly, I should say, three social enterprise hotels in Montreal, Banff, and Vancouver. And as everyone on the call is aware, unfortunately, hospitality and tourism is not doing so hot. Right now, the entire industry is hurting. And so we had to start to rethink skills also as an employer. And what does that mean for our sustainability as a federation, which has been quite an interesting journey, especially as we've been doing this labor market access research concurrently. And we know a couple of things. We know, and this is why Future Skills Center's mandate is so important, that evidence-based data for skills programs, unbelievably important, because we have billions of dollars of taxpayers' dollars that are being flown through the federal government to the provinces and the territories to do skills training. And if we want to create an adequate pipeline of not just entrepreneurs, but for these amazing entrepreneurs to get the right people that they need at the right time, those people need to have the skills. But unfortunately, one of the bottlenecks, and again, I apologize in advance, here I am doing Debbie Downer round two. I'm much funner to be on the childcare webinars, because then I just show pictures of the kids from our daycares, but anyway, and they're cute. But unfortunately, many of the skills training programs are actually built from Canada's economic models from the late 80s, early 90s, when we still had manufacturing industry here in Canada. And, you know, I see Marcella nodding, but it's 2021. And how do we move those skills training programs into the knowledge economy? So one of my colleagues at YWCA Hamilton, what they're actually doing is they're looking at microlearning, and they're looking at microlearning via an app so that employers, entrepreneurs, and quite frankly, the YWCA also has access to that just-in-time.
I love that.
Because we're all zoomed out, we're all exhausted. Like I've even been saying to my own staff as part of their professional development, nobody has time to do an online degree or certificate while you're working full time and looking, you know, and your children are running through the Zoom call. So access to that microlearning, I think is really, really important. Secondly, I'll just very quickly share, that's why you probably noticed I was very quiet during the digital tech talk, because we are charities and we are a charity, and some of us are literally still on Windows 95, which our IT has shared with me is unhackable, that the cybersecurity is solid on Windows 95. No one can hack it.
That's our other webinar to come.
So helpful tip. So we knew as a legacy organization, we saw the demographic shifts in Canada. And we know that the two fastest growing demographics in the country are newcomer youth and newcomers. So as As a newcomer, as a first-generation Canadian, I have responsibilities as a guest on this land, and it was really important for us to think about how do we do the tech, how do we get young people engaged in STEAM to get those skills, and we partnered with the tech startup incubated out of York called Indigenous Friends Association, and they've been working with us to actually run coding boot camps for Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth across the country, and that's been really, really eye-opening around how internally at YWCA we need to think about skills and tech, but also really, as I think Marcella pointed out, what are those jobs 25, 30 years from now? And I drive my colleagues at IFA at the tech startup crazy because we co-share office space, and I'm always like, what is blockchain? I don't get it. And they're like, Maya, settle down. And I'm like, no, really, I've watched documentaries. I still don't get what blockchain is. So we know that what the pedagogy needs to look like to be culturally responsive, to be anti-racist, we'll start to get at some of those solutions that Dr. Cukier the questions that Dr. Cukier was raising through her data earlier in the seminar.
Thanks so much. And I just looked at I appreciate your response and your candor. I looked at our questions. We have so many questions from the crowd. Unfortunately, I've been so engrossed in this conversation with all of you, I've neglected some of them. So I'm going to try to put them into the wrap-up question, going over to you, Nadine.
I know, and we're running out of time, and I have 3 stories to share.
I know, and I'm just like, I just want to keep talking with you guys. Like for the first time in a while, I don't feel zoomed out, but
I same here. I'm really enjoying the conversation. I'll say what I have to say quickly. Just tagging on. So I think I have 2 points in the loans side and the skills side. So unfortunately, business skills have not been emphasized for young women in schools. That's where it starts, right? And this needs to change, because what is learned in schools builds on the foundation, not only for what we're capable of accomplishing in your career, but also what you're inspired to pursue. We need to emphasize business training, digital tech training, and bookkeeping in high school and in post-secondary studies, just as much as we do the other topics. And back to the loan conversation. So Jill, loved what you had to say about where you are and in your loan process and how you look at things. But we have to realize that for a woman and a woman of color to sit in front of a banker, a financial institution, to ask for money, it takes huge courage. There's a series of generational things that we bring to the table that just to get there is a challenge. We have to recognize that. There has to be policies that looks at individual case by case of what it takes. And how do you move from a no to a yes? It's not, no, you're not getting the funding, but let's look at your business plan. Let's look at the financial statement and let's see how we're going to get you to a yes. And so there's a lot of training that's required around that. And that's one of the things in our Rise Up pitch competition, the 700 women that Dr. Suki talked about. To me, they've all won already, because we now know what the elements of business success looks like, and then with the supports that we've gotten, it's going to take us to the next level.
Oh,
100%.
That's wonderful. And that gets us to our kind of wrap up discussion where we mentioned at the beginning, we want to talk about the future. How can we get there? What government should do? How can we build on to get using cooperation and collaboration, what needs to be done for a post-pandemic world to evolve, to seize this momentum. So Nadine, thank you for bringing us here. I'm going to go over to Marcella. What do we need to do? How do we make this change?
Oh, super easy. I can do that in a minute.
Perfect.
No pressure. Fantastic. So I just want to say, like, what an amazing conversation. I think building on a lot of these things that we've talked about, and there's certainly, and some of the great reports that have been put together over the last little while. But, number one, really looking at how the financial supports that are available for women, women who are pursuing entrepreneurship, women who are entrepreneurs, and those support services around it. So things like childcare, things like like elder care, that's actually something that's affordable and can be that can reduce that burden. And then a big part of it too is looking, I think, taking a lot of organizations, institutions need to take a hard look at the bias that's embedded in their systems and how to actually remove that fear. Why should you? And I remember having that fear. I remember being nervous to go and sit in front of my banker and being rejected.
Still do.
And so we really try to have a completely different approach. And so really it's about it's about the money, but it's also about the support, and it's about the community, and being a part of this community that's there to support. And so that piece is really critical. And I think trying to make, it's building awareness of what is out there and building more support for what is actually approaching providing money in a way that is welcoming, and that is understanding, and that is flexible. And so, I think we have a long way to go in this respect, but we really, changes need to happen quickly. And the challenges that have been really, brought to the surface through COVID, the time is now. We can't wait 5 or 10 more years to make these changes. These changes need to happen sooner. And so how can we come together as organizations, as people, to make that happen? And it's not just solely on the government. It's not solely on, on business or corporations. It's people. And so, we need to activate as people to make sure that those pieces are in place. So, and get those skills. Absolutely. We are still, looking at, we're a resource. We've been a resource-based economy in this province for a really long time. And we can really see the after effects of really heavily investing in those types of skills, which are not going to be as relevant 5 or 10 years from now, or 25 or 30 years from now. So absolutely, totally agree with what Maya just said as well. So lots to do, but lots of opportunity. And this group, just think of, if we could come together and put our heads together again, post panel, what we could start to move forward. And I already see it through the initiatives and the work that's being done. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we have time for one last comment. So Jill, did you want to chime in, or Maya?
To say something super quickly.
Yeah.
So totally agree. I think we do really have to identify growing a business is a journey, right? It is a marathon, and we really do need to meet entrepreneurs where they are. And Nadine, I completely appreciate your point. So I think, and we also know more women entrepreneurs build their own companies through bootstrapping, right? Marcella mentioned that, and accessing their own resources. And that is incredible. And we need to look at and celebrate those pathways. And those who decide they do want to go down the funding route, we need to educate the financial institutions to remove the bias, recognize differences, and change their policies, right? Not just put marketing around some of the offerings. And then we need to create new models entirely. As I said, through angel investing, through diverse angel investors, all the way to venture capital, but also microfinance. Like, there's a huge opportunity in that space. We did a survey in November to 450 women entrepreneurs in BC. $10,000 to $50,000 is what they're looking for. And 77% think they're going to need funding in the next 24 months. So as we look ahead, to end things on a positive note, 91% of the entrepreneurs surveyed, some who knew our services, some who did not, are optimistic about the future. So this is a time for change. This is a time to reframe how we think, redefine it, and make sure we're doing that through an entirely inclusive lens.
Awesome. And can I just say one last thing?
Of course, I'm a softie. Yes.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And we want to humanize people.
Yeah.
We want when entrepreneurs show up, when in marketing we do this thing that's called audience personas, and you create these audience personas and you create strategies specifically for those individuals. We want our financial institutions, governments, to look at us in that way. Create an audience persona, and when we show up, look at me, see me, the woman sitting there, and deal with
the strength,
that woman, and the strength.
Right.
Exactly.
You bring.
Yeah. We want to be seen.
I feel so, okay. I feel this is great. I feel uplifted. It's amazing. Thank you to our amazing panelists. We're now at the end of the session. I could talk to you all day. I want to give a big thanks to everyone who joined us today. Sincere thank you to the Honourable Mary Ng for opening remarks, Dr. Wendy Cukier for the informative presentation, and for all of your support, WEKH for your support of the Women Entrepreneurship Conference event series. Jill, Nadine, Maya, Marcella, your experiences and insights were incredible. And for those of you, this is the first session of the annual conference. We're hoping you'll join for more events over the next 5 weeks. The next one up is See It, Be It launch and panel discussion, Crushing Entrepreneurial Stereotypes, taking place on March 5th at 1 p.m. So you can learn more and sign up the link that they've just put in the chat box. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you. Thank you.